I would like to welcome to Planet Waves FM and Planet Waves TV. Making his first appearance, Mr. Gemini Brett from Richmond,
Greetings.
California. And from halfway around the world, Daniel
Outside of
Giamario.
Manila, outside of Manila in the Philippines.
Outside Manila in the Philippines, Daniel Giamario, now becoming a recidivist, a guest on Planet Waves FM and TV. Guys, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Our pleasure.
So we're here to talk about the flat Earth and the flat Earth phenomenon. I guess Daniel put us together, Jem, because we've both invested time in listening to flat earthers. I've done this through, in particular, two different interviews, and posts on Substack where I get dialogue going to see if I can actually figure out what is being thought and what is being said.
Mm.
And I'm curious your experience with doing this. I mean, for me, I'll tell you, I'll state again, my only interest in this is that, as you both know, I've done quite a lot of work on COVID and the virus issue. I'm the kind of embedded journalist in Team No Virus. And then we took a census of the presenters who were saying that the virus was not real, and more than half of them were flat earthers. So I wouldn't be involved at all if it weren't for a bunch of people who I am vouching for as people who understand science, claiming to not understand things like latitude and longitude. You know, how I know when the sun's going to rise. You know, am I a sorcerer?
Well, you are a sorcerer.
Well, sorry.
But there is also there is latitude and longitude on most of the flat Earth models that are presented. So for me, it's been a few things. One, like typically I'm the conspiracy theorist in the room that people are inclined to just ridicule out of habit. And so I appreciated being on the other side of that thing, looking in,
me, finally.
Right. It's just like, are you mad? Right. But then secondly, I really appreciated the challenge, which inherently is how much of what you know is actually known? How much of it was just shown to you and given to you versus like what you've gleaned through your own personal experience. And I appreciated that, right? Because when I look out the window, I mean, there's bumps and whatnot, but Earth looks pretty flat. And when I'm up in a plane, like I haven't personally seen curvature really. So if I like take out all of the space photos and globes that were given to me in the classroom and whatnot, as that camp challenges me to do. And I had to just kind of say, all right, well, like, what is the evidence that I've experienced with my own eyes? And then also like entertaining a few of their different models have been intriguing. The last part, I guess, is, you know, we're all astrologers and many of the founders of our craft like believed we were on a flat Earth. So it also seems interesting to get after how would the zodiac work on a flat Earth? Like what would that look like, right? Is there anything in our heritage that might also be animated through at least just considering that cosmology? So I've spent some time with it. As I'm sure you've experienced as well, it can be quite frustrating because I've heard people say, well, this is the simple model. And when I'll challenge them and show them some evidence that for me just shows that the Earth can't be flat, then they'll come up with a model where there's mirrors in space to keep us completely deluded from the great truth there is, you know. And I mean, that's another thing that I've experienced personally and just witnessed so often when people start having an awakening that, you know, what they were taught in school was a bunch of nonsense. It's pretty easy just to go follow the first cat that comes around and says, oh, that was bullshit, and this is the truth, right? And so it's pretty easy to jump on the bandwagon of anyone who's also awake. So, you know, I've felt prey to that, I think, at times in my life. So I've tried to hold space for it. But when it comes down to it, I think it's like a CIA, like PSYOP.
I do too.
Yep. Yeah, your gain's a little bit low, Daniel. Yeah, I mean,
I do too. It's that-
yeah, even they accuse each other of being operatives. It's if you look at some of the video from flat Earth conferences, they're constantly accusing each other of being spies and spooks and plants, and they all agree that the flat Earth Society is CIA.
Hmm.
That's pretty much a given. Um, right. I could keep going, but
Please do. I want to hear
well,
more of that. I haven't
okay.
watched much video of like, battles of who's the CIA and who's the real flat earther and that kind of thing. Of
Well,
being
it just comes up. They just start getting thorny with each other, and then which among them are the real flat earthers and who are just the shills trying to
Hmm.
make money? So the whole thing is quite fraught, and and it's reduced to a matter of opinion, which I think is interesting, right? As if it is a matter of opinion, and to me it has the so. All right, I've been doing work I've been doing as a journalist now. I'm in my 41st year, and that doesn't count all that I did in high school and being a generally inquisitive and science-minded person before I was 19 years old. So I took some umbrage, a little shade, at being told that I didn't really understand the spherical model, that I was just repeating what I was told. But I entered astrology with 12 years down as a scientific investigative reporter, meaning that I was working quite high level, exposing General Electric, Monsanto, Westinghouse, various health departments and the EPA for fraudulent studies involving toxicology and mass poisoning incidents and all of that. And, there's probably a 250,000 pages of documents in my storage locker. And so I cannot be accused of just glossing over the top of things or repeating what I've been told. So I noticed that right away, that I was constantly being told that I was just spouting that the earth was flat, that I didn't understand it. And I entered astrology and verified what I was reading. I didn't just, and I had astronomy training before that, but as an astrologer, I verified it. I mean, there's a theory that there's a second moon, that there's a second moon called Lilith, not black,
Not the black moon, but the
not the
dark moon,
oscillating
Lilith. Yeah.
apogee, and not the asteroid, but a moon, an actual moon of some kind called Lilith.
Yeah.
So there's an ephemeris for it and things like that. And there's Vulcan, and then there's the trans-Neptunian points, and there's trans-Pluto, and there's all this stuff. So I pried back the layers of all of that and try to get back to the origins. Then skip ahead, 38 years, and I've got a bunch of people telling me that the Earth is flat. And I make it analogous to being, I'm driving down, we're driving down the New York Thruway in my nice Subaru, and scanners on, we're listening to the police talking, and someone says, "Hey, bro, your tires are square." I'm like, "What do you mean my tires are square?" "No, bro, you've never seen your tires. They're square." I'm like, "Well, we're doing 80. How is that possible?" I mean, we're moving down the highway just fine, whizzing past all the speed traps. Um, so that's what it sounded like to me. But these people are so insistent. They're so convinced of something that I had to get underneath it to see what was going on. But again, to me, it would have been just some other crazy thing on the internet if they hadn't been such prominent people, many of whom have done absolutely amazing work on the missing virus problem. I would have glossed it over completely. I wouldn't have cared, but it was driving us crazy. I mean, I work with Jeffrey Strahl. He was a physics professor. Uh, we're not coming from ignorance here, or brainwashing. And so those of us who understand the shape of the planet, I think, what is with these people? Like, what the heck is going on? So I had a theory, which I can share a little in a minute or three, but I wanted to get inside their minds a little bit, and give them a chance to convince me like I do with the guy trying to sell contaminated houses back to the people. The Love Canal Area Revitalization Agency. They just take houses with monitor wells, test wells in the backyard and dioxin tainted creeks going by, and they try to sell them to people. And when I was 19, I went to visit this guy, in a little house in Love Canal, and said, and I was had my cougine, my very nice cougine haircut, and my corduroy pants and black shoes and sweater vest, and sat down in his office and basically said, "Okay, explain this to me, convince me." It didn't work so good.
So what points have the flat earthers that you've spoken to made that at least gave you pause?
Oh, none of their technical assertions work at all. I mean, for example, the idea that I've had some fun with Daniel about this. Daniel, I imagine it's 11:16 in the morning where you are. And can you verify what
Yes.
time is it? 11:16.
11:16.
That's crazy because it's 11:16 here too. Can you just verify that it's light out where you are?
It's right now raining heavily, but it is light.
Okay, because I can see out the window. It is dark here. Now, first of all, I want to explain that. So get that explained. And so when I approach them, I approach them with not getting into like the Michelson-Morley experiment and the ether and the what's another good one? What's the thing with the direction of wind currents and all that stuff? My opening question for them is, "Mommy, why is it dark at night?"
Yeah, but their reasoning, right? I mean, most of them, right? Because there's different models, but most of the cats I've seen that have taken it, I think, well, to the edge, pun intended, is that we're on this disc and it looks like the UN map.
I'm getting a weird buzzing sound from you, Jim.
Let me. How's this? Any better?
That fixed it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that we're on this disk world, right, where the North Pole is the center
Yeah.
of the disk, and therefore the North Star is right above the center
Mhm.
of the disk. And that south is in every direction.
Mm.
And so, like, what the South Pole is actually just the edge of the disk. So
Yep.
that's intriguing. That's kind of like difficult to wrestle with, right? But then that the sun and the moon are both like quite close to us and low, and that what sunrise is the sun circling around the disk. And when it comes close to you, it gets light, and when it goes away, it gets dark,
Right.
right? And I don't even know what kind of experiment I could set up to try to experience if that's possible. I mean,
Yeah.
but I mean, I appreciate that as a theory at least, right? Like, so I mean, at least they have a theory for that one, right?
Yeah. But it doesn't account for the seasons and night and day.
Well, no, where the seasons would be is that it's not on a fixed circle. So let me just show you the zodiac on the disk Earth. It's interesting, right? Because we know that the tropical zodiac is named for the same thing that the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn are, right?
Yeah, and that it's based on the sun meeting the earth and not some kind of celestial thing.
Right. And so there's the equator, right? So that's 0 Aries and 0 Libra. And then we have signs that are north of the equator, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, that bring us to the north bound, which is the Tropic of Cancer, right? Then we go back. So in their model, basically the equator would be somewhere between that North Pole at the center of the disk and the edge of the disk, which is the South Pole, right? And then the Tropic of Cancer would be closer to the North Pole, the center point, and the Tropic of Capricorn closer to the edge. And so the sun, it's not only on a fixed track, it's also throughout the course of the year coming closer to the center, right? So that the closest would be when it gets to Cancer, and then the furthest away would be when it gets to Capricorn. And that alone, like, if there's a way that like a light ball coming towards you becomes visible and lights up your whole world, and going away from you becomes invisible, and therefore you're back into the darkness, like I can actually see the almost like the elegance in that kind of model for the tropical zodiac. But the issue for me is like just the celestial poles, because as soon as you get south of the equator and I've seen it with my own eyeballs, right? Like, again, where I have appreciated the challenge, you're like, dude, you're religious, right? Like you were given this bald earth religion. I was like, oh shit, I'm like a priest of that religion, right? Like this is what I teach. And so I said, I better look at my religion a little bit, right? But I've been to Peru, I've been to Australia, I've been to places where now I can see the south celestial pole. So how are you going to have two celestial poles without two terrestrial poles?
Mm.
And it's just like there's just no model, and that's the greatest challenge that I've been able to like bring some of them back to the globe with. And the one where I've received these responses like, oh, it's a system of mirrors in space. And it's like what? Like, how would that work, right? The other fun one is
I hadn't
like
heard that one.
in the kind of UN map disk model, you have Australia and South America on opposite sides of the disk. So that if you wanted to take a plane from Chile to Sydney, you're flying over the North Pole and like you're flying over the whole thing. Can you picture that?
Yeah.
And it's like, man, people take that flight. Like I haven't taken that flight, but I know people have taken that flight. Like, and it doesn't take forever. So what are you suggesting, that they're going through some kind of time warp, or the rest of the planes fly like, I don't know, a 20th of our capable speed just to keep the hoax up? Or like, where's that one coming? There's a lot of things that are pretty easily debunked, I think. But I have been impressed with the fortitude of people that are in that belief, right? To just really defend it tooth and nail. And again, I like to kind of say, all right, like, where am I doing that? Yeah. But I mean, as far as like day and night, at least they have a thing and they have all sorts of animations to show it and whatnot.
Yeah, but they don't show anything.
Yeah, I hear you.
Look, when I go up on the mountain and I'm looking west, the sun is not getting further away. It's not getting smaller. The disk is actually here. I'll use my mason teapot lid. It's actually sinking below. You can see this. You can photograph it while it's happening. And they're saying, no, actually, it's getting further. But after a while, I started to realize they are all kidding. They avoid every technical question. And they avoid all the people like Dave McKeegan, who's exceptional at showing the scientific evidence, directly, testable evidence that that this is basically a joke. And they like to argue against mathematics because kind of like the woke movement, they're saying like that mathematics is like the white man's tool to keep people oppressed.
Right. I know.
Like making people come to work on time is racist. And and the thing is that, if you can calculate the ascendant accurately, there's a reason for that. And all the calculations that you're using are based on a spherical Earth, and they work. The joke of the sunrise, my sunrise joke is that I can predict between the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle, the exact time and direction of sunrise or sunset any day for any location on the planet, any day, and it can be verified by anyone with a wristwatch and a compass. And that's based on actual spherical latitude and longitude, and the sun being 93 million miles away, the 23-degree axial tilt, and it accounts for precession of the equinoxes.
Yeah, and you don't even need the distance to the sun for that, right? It's all spherical.
Well, it's trig. It's trig, though. It's trigonometry based on the sun as one of the points of the triangle.
Yeah.
So, but it's in there, but they're quite immune to those kind of rational arguments, and it seems to be irrationality versus rationality, and not the comparison of two scientific models.
Yeah, it's rather Erisian. I mean, I shouldn't offend Eris in that way, actually, because Eris is also probably logical, but it really is just like, Chaos for the point of chaos, it feels like in some ways. I like
Yeah.
that math is racist. I mean, time is racist,
Time is
right?
racist. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What do you do about it? And I guess a thing that I also appreciate anyone who's challenging the convention, but we don't want to get stuck in these spaces. And that's why it feels like a psyop to me, right? It's like when people start to understand that everything that they were taught is nonsense, they're likely to rebel. So it's probably really smart not only to like just experiment with the rats and see what they do because that's interesting, but also tunnel them off into a place where their, you know, devotions to finding out truth won't get them any closer to the truth, but will actually get them further away. So
Yeah.
those at the top stay safe.
And look, was everything you were told false? I can tell you a lot of things I learned in school were true.
Oh, many were true, but I was told that astrology is utter, nonsense, superstitious, chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, but maybe by some definitions it is.
I agree with that, and I challenge my astrology every day. I'm also
Yeah.
skeptical, but I mean, I think a lot of what I was taught in history class is utter bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, but that's highly interpretive.
Absolutely.
It's
But
an
it's
right.
but it's taught as if it's not,
Yeah.
right?
Poker face. Yes.
Right. And I mean, it's not like have you seen this film Capricorn 1,
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I trotted that one out when I was doing my article called "What If the Moon Landing Happened?"
uh-huh.
And it's a Mars mission, and it is obviously allegorical of the moon mission. And the plot for the viewers, tell me if I get this wrong, but the plot is that they want to go to Mars, but just at the end of right before they're going to launch, they realize they can't get there, and they tell the guys, well, we're going to fake the mission, and they don't like this. They don't want to participate in the mission being faked, and then they find out that their deaths are going to be faked, and they don't like that either because it means that they're going to be killed. They're not going to be so fake. So where does that fit into the?
Why I brought it up is, and what I really liked about that movie, and the contemplation that I still have as a gift from that film is that like all of Mission Control thought they were actually landing on Mars, and they were cheering, and it's like you don't have to bring too many people in on the conspiracy. So like I don't think my teachers were lying to me. I think they believed in this lie
Mhm.
that they were taught. And like
Yeah.
I'm like you, like I love the sciences and I'm a mathematician and it's hard to claim that 2 + 2 = 4 is a lie. Like I'm not going there. I do think that we should teach about two-ness also, but that's a whole different trip, right?
Yeah.
But I do think I've learned things about world wars and other parts of, accepted history that I don't think were factual. And I don't think in any way that my professors, well, some of them might have been, just complying with the curriculum because they don't want to share their own personal views. I don't know. But I don't think they were like trying to lie to us just to mess with some
Hmm.
kids or something or to keep us in the program. But yeah, and so I shouldn't say everything that I was taught in school was nonsense, but there are a lot of things like looking back, you know, where like I thought this was the land of the free and the home of the brave and those kinds of things, and that's very much been challenged for me at least since
I could
2001
interject.
and should have been before then.
If I could interject something, of course, this is something that happens in pretty much every field where they want to protect their turf, whether it's anthropology or archaeology, that there's a club. They have to keep it with a certain boundaries. And I think what's happened with the religious flat earthers, they want to keep it within that particular club. And they're not open to other views that change what their orthodoxy has become. Um, uh, One of the things I'll mention is that Gemini and I have been doing a cosmology course together recently, and we have been tossing these things around. Not around. We haven't gone into the flat Earth thing, but there is something very important in the history of our craft where there's two different ways of looking at what we experience as human beings. There is the version of the Ptolemy system that is entirely based along the idea that the Earth is the center. And actually, there's many things about that Kepler tried to shift it around, but basically it is a view of how we view the sky. And you can come up with a very usable model, which I like to call Neo-Ptolemaic, okay, which is based upon how we perceive the heavens. And then you have the heliocentric model, which is the opposite view, so you can see them as being contrasting. But even in Ptolemy's school, they were aware of, for example, both zodiacs, that there was the zodiac of the stars and the zodiac of the earth. And so basically, it's whether you become a fundamentalist regarding one rather than the other. And actually, they're complementary. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of an earth dweller, it is how we see it moves. It's a separate issue than whether it's a sphere or flat. But what I'm suggesting is that there's really different ways of looking at it. And if you become religiously a fundamentalist, that you have to look at it from the sun's perspective, or you have to look at it from the earth's perspective, then you're not taking both into account. So there is something, I mean, even Ptolemy knew both zodiacs, for example, but then you either became, I'm a siderealist or I'm a tropicalist, when in fact they both work together. In the same way, the earth person on the skin of the planet sees the movements in a particular way. Well, if you don't have the physical experience, this is where I very much relate to what Gemini Brett had to say. He's been to the South. I used to, in the late 60s, early 70s, we would take the polar route. The flights would go over the pole. We'd fly I flew from LA to London on the polar route. Hey, you can look down, you can see what you're flying over. It's a lot of these people, they just live in their heads. They're not actually directly experiencing the world. So they're attached to this particular model. But it happens with astrology too. You're a siderealist, the rest of them are a bunch of crap, or you're a tropicalist, and the constellational based astrology is BS, when in fact they both operate together. That's all.
Well, okay, but there's a philosophical issue here. Is somebody saying that sidereal Taurus is more accurate than tropical Taurus because there's actually a bull out there, and if you don't like actually aim for the bull, like the moon is not actually. No, there's not a bull. It's an asterism. It's a bunch of stars that are themselves not. They're one symbol of a bull, and the sign Taurus is another symbol of a bull. So it's a question of which tarot card spread you're using.
Well, of course, this is the kind of thing we were discussing. I'll tell you a true story. I was invited to be a speaker at the very first UAC. It was in San Diego. And they were all excited. We've invited an astronomer to chair the night.
Oh, yeah.
And,
was that you?
God, no. I wish they had invited me to do that. No, because I was known at that point for doing night sky presentations. And so at that point, they said, no, we have an astronomer to do it. And so he gave this presentation. And a week later, he puts out a full page thing in the newspaper saying, I will offer a $10,000 prize if you can show me how the sun is in Taurus or whatever, And he just basically was just screwing with the astrology world. The fact that they invited someone like that to do it was just made a mockery of the whole thing.
Right. No, that's not the spirit of.
For that prize. I could win that. I could win that prize. Sign me up.
Yeah, but then they're not. They're basically trying to debunk the sign-based version, which has nothing to do with the stars at all.
Right. I mean, the question is, how much do people understand when they make an assertion, and if you probe their knowledge. I talked to someone on the Huygens probe team. I was in Paris, and the Huygens probe was based outside of Paris. So I hired a car and went out there and spent the day in the Huygens probe office, part of the Cassini space probe. Huygens was the probe dropped onto, I think, Titan or Europa, one of those moons of Saturn. I may be naming moons of Jupiter, but anyway, it's a proto-Earth, believed to be a proto-Earth moon, And at the end of the day, I mentioned that I was an astrologer. I have a fetish for hanging out with astronomers. And I mentioned that I was an astrologer, and she said, there must be something wrong with your zodiac because my horoscope is never accurate. Like, wait, do you know what the sidereal vernal point is? And she didn't know what it was. And so I gave her my copy of Raphael's Ephemeris because I always, in those years, I had a supply of them. And I said, here, why don't you just look at these tables and just figure out how they work, like what exactly they're saying. Now, okay, so then maybe do you know the story of what happened to the Huygens probe? I mean, the mathematics were all off on the Huygens probe, and they were going to drop the thing from Cassini when it was going to be eclipsed by Saturn, and they would never have recovered their data. And so the people in that office had a little mathematics problem, and it seemed to include not knowing what the sidereal vernal point was. Just saying. I mean,
well, no, I could give you an example. One time I was doing an event in Hawaii. It was for the for the Venus transit, and we set up a showing for our group in the planetarium there. And so we were watching this whole presentation, and I decided I would go talk to the person who was presenting it, you know. And so I was saying, well, do you know that what you're presenting there is he made comments about astrology that were completely wrong. And I started talking to him, and he realized that I knew what I was talking about. He says, wow, that's very interesting. I never knew that. He was just like boxed in to his own view on it. And he said, well, thank you for informing me of that. Now I know how to say this differently next time I do the presentation. So they just are in their own little world, and to have us show up and let them know that we know what we're talking about can be very, very helpful. I mean, so I had that direct experience with a guy that was astronomer who was presenting a planetarium show, and for him to be pointed out that he was not saying accurate stuff, he was curious. He wanted to know about that. So anyway, that's
Beautiful that he was open-minded enough to, right?
was,
Because
yeah, yeah.
sometimes you get that full shutdown. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm so devoted to teaching astronomy to astrologers is because tropical astronomy is not really taught to astronomers anymore. I mean, there's a couple reasons for that. I think first and foremost, they're now so concerned with looking far away and long ago and getting into kind of cosmology and that and exploring exoplanets and so there's less of that lay on the back in the grass and watch the whole sky thing. But another part of it is just like in the need to vehemently deny astrology, you don't want to honor even like celestial longitude anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't too long ago when astronomers considered those first 30 degrees of celestial longitude Aries as well, even though it wasn't mapping the constellation. Like the whole idea of what the zodiac is has very much been reframed in astronomy. And we're not even talking like back hundreds of years ago, like pretty recently. So I'm very interested in kind of preserving the elegant and beautiful tropical astronomy, and also to help astrologers through that weird thing that happens when you realize that signs and constellations aren't the same thing and that they don't align. That can be really difficult for folks who are pointing their iPhone astronomy app around and seeing that Taurus Jupiter is with the ram.
sure. And but then there's also houses, right? That's another issue. So when the 13th sign hoax made one of its services, I did a satire on the involving the 13th house, because if there's a 13th sign, then we should add a 13th house. But this is a lot of this is just red herring bullshit because their astrology and astronomy's frames of reference are not, they don't differ by not agreeing exactly on where Jupiter is that day. It's on what you do with the information. We're just a philosophical, poetic version of the interpretation, and they're a nomenclature based, phenomenal based. What can you? How much does Jupiter weigh? but they don't know how much Jupiter weighs. That's the thing. And they can't fucking verify how much Jupiter weighs because they can't put it on a scale and weigh it. And, so there's a frame of reference issue. I used to know Mike Brown, who discovered Eris and Sedna and Quayar and a bunch of other things. And one morning I woke up and at like 6 in the morning, and in my inbox was an email sent to me from Mike Brown the night. He must have stayed up till 2, 3 in the morning California time, and then I woke up a few hours later. Eric, what do you think of this article? And it was I Heart Astrologers. He's a Gemini, and he said, astrologers and astronomers are twins. We're both looking at the sky. We're both seeking the truth. We're just doing it in different ways. And I thought it's still, you can still find the article. Just type I Heart Astrologers into Google. And I thought it was funny that he's a Gemini, making the metaphor of his twin brother, the astrologer, and also that he had the sensitivity to recognize that we're inspired by the same thing in a sense, the quest for meaning, the quest for knowledge, and that we're working from two different frames of reference that are related to one another, and that because he is who he is, nobody can tear him down. You can't discover that many planets and then have somebody say, well, Mike Brown, you're full of shit because you fraternize with astrologers. I mean, he told the New York Times, when the New York Times asked him why he wrote down the time he discovered Eris, time of day, he said, because I knew astrologers were going to ask me for it. So he's always taken this slightly unorthodox view. And I in my own way try to do the same thing by really understanding the astronomy and knowing the astronomers as best I can. Zane Stein starts this really. I mean, I'm sure guys like Rudyard, paid visits to physics departments just because it would be fun. But in our time, Zane Stein starts this off by being friends with Brian Marsden at the Minor Planet Center at Harvard, who gave him an ephemeris, calculated the first ephemeris for Chiron was calculated by Marsden. And then he was friends with Charlie Kowal from the time that he met him right after the discovery of Chiron for the rest of his days. So Zane Stein, a chironic guy if there ever was one, he starts to heal this breach in modern times, and astrologers named Nessus. Nessus was not named. I think 1993 HA or 4 HA, whatever, and they named it at the suggestion of a small committee of astrologers.
Wow.
Melanie Reinhardt, Dieter Koch, Robert von Heeren, and then they put a quick halt to that. That was the last time that happened. Maybe Cariclo also got named.
And that was actually invited by astronomers then.
The astrologers reached out. The astrologers reached out and said, "Well, you're naming these things. May we suggest that you that you do this?" So there's a lot more room for dialogue, and people figure out quickly that I'm interested in getting the technicalities right, and that I love science as a field of inquiry, not as a religion, but as a probe, as a tool to understand something about reality. And I don't think any branch of philosophy or even natural science gives us the truth. It just gives us a way to orient within a lot of chaos, to be able to sort things out in a certain way. And to say that, well, this rock is this kind of a rock, and that rock is that kind of a rock, and then 20 years later they're like, well, actually that rock is more like that rock, and it's going on. As long as you don't take it too damn seriously, science is a lot of fun. But as far as mathematics and physics go, there's not a lot of wiggle room. For example, on the sunrise equation, you can't really mess with that too much.
Especially with mathematics, right? I mean, physics, often we will create a constant to solve the problem and then utilize that constant later as if it's just part of, the universe's nature. And I mean, what else are you going to do? But there can be a lot of holes when you investigate. I mean, like the precessional calculations are intriguing
But
for
there's a
reasons
very
like
small
that.
observation arc on that
Yeah.
with precise
Yeah, yeah.
measurement.
And with everything, right? Like far away, right? And I was just, we just,
Yeah.
I'm the president of the NCGR chapter out here. We just had Gary Christian on, right? And he was talking about how just weak the curve fits are for many of these planets, and how you get back or forward even hundreds of years and your ephemerides are probably not quite accurate, you know. I love showing Galileo's chart, right? Because we have Galileo's chart in his own hand.
Ah,
And yeah, I mean, people have claimed it's like dirty data because he's showing both February 15th and 16th, and it's a Julian calendar, by the way. But it's just that he's showing the date from the old timekeeping method, which was starting the day at sunset,
right.
and then the new method, which was this whole AM PM thing that was just starting to become the fad, right? And you can see he's like trying to rectify his birth time within like half an hour. And you know, he's got a the moon was with the ram and he calls it Taurus. So like I feel like a great when I'm in a debate with astronomers, which happens for me a lot. It's like, you know, was Galileo not a sky gazer? But if you look at Mercury in Galileo's chart, it's like 5 degrees off from where we believe it was. And he was born, as you know, most are, with Mercury under the beams of the sun, so not visible. And it's not like he was looking in that moment anyway. But it's interesting to see like how much the ephemerides have changed. I mean, improved since that day. And we have to imagine that's going to happen too. And then when we're looking at things like Daniel and I have been talking about some of these really long cycles, right? Like our solar system orbiting galactic center, like how long have we been measuring? And it's really hard to project out that far.
Yeah,
So
a century. I
very
mean,
old
we didn't know the
data.
galactic center existed till 1930, right? That was discovered in
Mhm.
1930, right?
The interesting thing about that is that back at the end of the 19th century, they had certain dates for the procession that they were all using, which was about 24,000. And even today, there's about 3 or 4 popularly used numbers. You know, like Otwell uses a different number. Often people use 25,920. Others use 25,800. You know, and also there's a sense that actually it's not a stable number. You know, that it's changing. That there's a certain oscillation in it. So that maybe at one point 24,000 was accurate. You know, so these long cycles are really important to be taken into account. The obliquity, the eccentricity, the mutations, and all the rest of it. So Robert Hand always made this really great comment that if we're actually doing objective science, you cannot actually prove what they were actually measuring, you know, even 200 years ago. You
Yeah,
know, that the objective universe, there is really no external objective universe. There's only the situation that we're actually in that we can measure. And you cannot prove that it's always been that particular way.
no, nor do we need it to be.
No, no.
I'd like to query the need for that. But look, the Mayan mathematicians were incredible in terms of their ability to predict transits of Venus
Mhm.
centuries ahead and back. And how on earth were they doing that? I think, well, I mean, Rob Hand calls the Enlightenment the Endarkenment. That, you know, all this time we're saying, well, we're in the Enlightenment, you know, we're Renaissance and Renaissance man and all this. He's the Endarkenment because things are pretty damn stupid for a lot of the Enlightenment. And so, what, you know, the question is, why do we need the information? I think that's the first question. Is you want to know this? Well, why? You know, what are you going to do with the information?
And there have been different worldviews throughout global history.
Of
There have
what they're
been
going to do with the information?
Yeah, yeah. So like there's certain times in history where the correspondence model was dominant, and then there's other times in history where the linear model is dominant. You know, so that for example, in magic or in alchemy, and other times in history, many times in China, many times in other parts of the world, that when you thought Saturn, you would think the metal, or you would actually think things other than that particular planet. There's a correspondence between different things,
I
which
see.
is a very different model of reality than the linear one or the cause and effect one. the correspondence universe I think actually been more common throughout the history of humanity than the linear and cause and effect one.
Sure. I mean, well, it's observable. You know, people are making art. You know, they're observing correspondence between gold and the sun and Leo and sunflowers, and it's much more observation oriented, right? And a lot of science is observation. There's two different concepts of science, I think. One is the you know, can we synthesize the molecule exactly? Right. That's one kind of science, right? Where you know, I once talked to a chemist who said that her recipe for LSD, they found out that there was a step in the recipe that was off by half a degree. And she really made a point of that. It was off by half a degree. Can you imagine such a thing? That's one kind of science. And another kind of science is you're out you know, looking at weeds, or you know, you're collecting rocks. And that's a whole different concept of science than synthesizing LSD in a laboratory, I would say.
Wait, was LSD possible because of that half a degree off, or that was just
No, they
one
found the
particular-
mistake. They found the mistake in the formulation.
Wait, but so was LSD an accident because of that mistake?
No,
Were they
no, no,
trying-
no. It was just they were synthesizing it in their lab, and they found an error in the recipe that one stage in the process had to be at like whatever 172 and a half, and really was 173.
So they made something that ended up not being LSD and not
No,
working.
she didn't say that either. She said they found a mistake in the formula. They found a mistake in the recipe. I didn't probe her deeply, but I assume they corrected it. What she seemed to be implying was, we found a mistake by half a degree at one step, and we corrected it and went on. That's one concept of science. Another concept of science is I'm going to look under rocks and try to see what's under there. Right? That's a
Right.
whole different idea. You know, in terms of just observing the world. You're not trying to make something. You're not trying to do something necessarily. You just want to
don't wanna- you don't
observe the
wanna turn
world
it-
and understand it a little bit better so you can love it more.
You're not
Well, I
wanting to
think
turn
this-
it into a technology.
Right,
You're-
exactly. And most
But
of
I
what
mean,
we call
also,
science
because-
is technology.
Mhm.
I'm hearing like discovery versus application, right? Like, so Huygens, like they sorted out that they had done the math wrong and they weren't going to lose the signal and not
Yeah,
get a
like with
picture
like
back
half a
from the
day, like with
Titan.
12 hours, that they were very close to the edge on that one.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But then they sorted it out, and now we have a picture of Titan thanks to Huygens like crashing into a moon of Saturn.
Yeah, right.
Which is- I mean, if you believe NASA, man. But I guess we're off the flat Earth.
Well,
thing,
that's true.
which
We'll
I'm
come back to the
excited
flat Earth,
about.
and it comes back that they are arguing for the flat Earth because NASA lies, right? That's one of their main platform planks of why the Earth is flat, is because NASA lies. But
What's
that's
your
not
feeling
not
about-
a scientific statement that NASA lies. That's not a scientific, that you can't prove that. You can prove each issue, or you can analyze each issue. You know, you got to look at Apollo 1, Apollo 2. You've got to check every last fucking thing. You can't just say generally NASA lies. Obviously, some of these are done as part of my raspberry blown at flat Earth. I managed to get the leader of the Cassini project, Alan Stern, onto this program. I was given I got hold of Southwest Research Institute, and I was just looking for photos of Pluto, and I ended up getting Alan Stern himself for half an hour.
Wow, cool.
Because I wanted to talk to the guy who said he sent the probe to Pluto and find out how to probe the guy with the probe and see what he said to me when I asked him my little kid questions, just to see what he said. And I think we need, I think that would serve people a lot more than making the claim that NASA lies. And my first test for him was, I had a list of questions, but really the first one I thought was the most significant was I had the paper written by Dave Jewett and Jane Liu, who discovered 1992 QB1. They made the first discovery of a planet outside of the orbit of Pluto, which is now Albion. discovered in 1992 on the Aries point. And I pulled up that paper, and my first question for Dr. Stern was, "Have you heard of this paper?" Because I thought, well, if he's heard of it, we can keep going. If he hasn't heard of it, he's got a problem. Because it's right, he's exploring the Kuiper belt, right? And he said, "Well, let me tell you a story about that paper." He said, "When that paper was written, Professor so-and-so, or the editor of whichever magazine it was in, Nature or something, called me up and said, Alan, I need you to peer review this paper. Do you mind?" And so he had personally peer reviewed the paper. And I said, "Well, I guess you've read it. I guess you thought it was pretty good." He said, "Well, it got published." So we went on from there. I have no reason to doubt that they got that probe to Pluto. I think the technology is absolutely possible to do that, and they wouldn't need to have like 10 fake Mars probes, right? Why have 10 fake Mars probes? Why? The moon landing, I think, is in a class by itself, though. That's my take on NASA. The moon landing is in a category of its own. Highly political, part of the Cold War, part of the Kennedy legacy. It's on and on and on and on and on. And I want to believe that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and that he overcame tremendous grief for the loss of his child, and he landed the thing with a minute of fuel left, and so on and so on. I want to believe that, but I
How
can't
old
get.
were you at
Well, I
the moon
remember it.
landing?
I'm old enough to have lied to my nursery school class that I was going to Florida to watch the launch,
Nice.
and
See,
everyone believed
NASA
me. And I thought,
lies.
"Oh shit, lying! People believe you if you make up a story." So I missed my career as a science fiction writer right in that moment.
I could share something about that because I was 20 when that happened. All right.
20. I was 5, so
Yeah, and
bring it
I
on.
was so very much, even back then, caught up in the heartbreak I had when I realized the majority of the space program was a cover for military. And so that among myself and my friends, we were so involved in the other stuff that was happening at that time, from the
Hmm.
moratorium, Woodstock, and everything else, that I didn't even pay attention. You know,
Hmm.
everybody else was zeroed in on that. But I knew it was all politics. I knew that whether it happened or not didn't occur to me. It's just that I didn't think it was important because it was all political, and it was NASA was a cover for military.
Yeah, for the
And
ICBM.
we all felt that at that particular time period. So
Hmm.
it was for me and my own peers at that time, it was kind of a non-event. It was a distraction from what was actually taking place at that time period, which was far more critical for the future of humanity than whether or not we landed on the moon.
Yeah, and what I said to one of the flat earthers was, why are we debating whether the space shuttle is bullshit and not asking why they once sent 7 colonels up? They did. They say they did. Okay, so on the issue of the flat Earth, I mean, the segue out of NASA is that we're not supposed to trust the shape of the planet because NASA is full of shit, and therefore the Earth is flat, which is not logical. And also, we don't know the Earth is a sphere because NASA told us. We know the Earth is a sphere because the Vikings could get back to Norway using celestial navigation on a sphere. We know there's a lot of proof that the Earth is a sphere that does not require photos from NASA.
Right.
And so I think that, and the question is, why is the flat Earth so popular now? Why are these people so vehement now? Besides the psyop, and by the way, the psyop theory is it has a I've churned up enough discussion to come up with at least this. That as they were approaching the 2019 50th anniversary of the Apollo program, that flat earthers were deployed to run interference on the people asking legitimate questions about the Apollo program, to derail the conversations about the Apollo program in the mid-20 teens, that they deployed flat earthers to fuck with the people actually doing the legit research on the moon landing. So this at least is a plausible puzzle piece, right? It fits the narrative without shoehorning anything. And say, okay, let's keep going. Then that just gets the quarter in the machine, and then you have to push the levers, you know. So that made sense, and we know that I think it's coming out of a public relations firm, just like COVID, just like the Me Too movement. So the thing is, I quickly began to analyze, and I can't prove that, but Mark Bailey, I said that to Mark Bailey, and he sent me the documentation on the PR firm. I said, I suspect the presence of of like a BlackRock owned public relations firm mixed up in all of this. I got back documents naming the firm. I haven't gone there yet. I'll be bored one fine day and look into them. But I began to see this as a phenomenon of something else. That's the thing with the flat Earth. I think we can't look at it in isolation, and that the something else is the digital environment. I think that it seemed to me very soon after I heard that these people were obsessed by it, not to be about confusion regarding COVID, which is Mark Bailey's theory. People are so disoriented by how this whole thing was, just played on us, but rather an expression of digital consciousness. And I'm looking around for some form of a disc. Here's one. You could fit the Earth on this, right? Well, this is pretty flat. You could probably upload most of Google Earth onto a 4 terabyte drive, or certainly a good sample of it. And so I think of the whole flat Earth thing as being an expression of the uploaded Earth.
Yeah, actually, if I can just interject.
Yeah, please.
That is actually when David Icke, for example, he was accused of being a flat earther. And without getting into more of what he would say, he said that, well, the reason is because if you use a hologram model where a hologram begins flat, and then the whole thing is projected from that. And so this is a misunderstanding, and I think that relates very much to what you're talking about there, that you can actually put it on a flat surface, but then the whole thing comes from that. Doesn't mean the rest of it isn't real.
Yeah, and there's ways to verify. Look, I have enough spiritual experience and training to know that we're in a kind of secondary reality, and that the laws of space and time are subject to adaptation and adjustment through miraculous events, blah blah blah. But there's still going to be an eclipse on April 8th, exactly at whatever time it's going to happen, right? And I'm not. I would never mix those two orders of reality for some manipulative purpose. As far as I'm concerned, the moon damn well better go past the sun right at that time, and it will. If a bunch of Mayans, chiseling in their rocks could predict that. So
all I was saying is I'm agreeing with your analogy there.
Yeah,
you can put it all on a flat.
Sure. Yeah, but the thing is that the digital consciousness is a state of mind. It is not merely that you could fit the Earth in here in some abstract way, and then think, oh well, it has no dimension. It's dimensionless. It must be flat. But rather, there's a profound disorientation that we are living through as a consequence of this constant overexposure to digital technology. Look, we're meeting. You're on the West Coast, Jim, and you're in some place that doesn't exist there, Daniel, because it can't possibly be 12 hours apart. And I'm here in the hills of New York State. That's crazy. We're communicating at the speed of light, having bilocation experiences like Babaji. That's crazy. That's disorienting. We're having out-of-body experiences. You're right, with everyone watching. We're all having an out-of-body experience. And this is disorienting to people. It is fucking with their minds. And their intellects are not sufficiently grounded to be able to hold the contradictions and not go crazy. And I think
that's intriguing. So let me just check in with that. So what I'm hearing is that because of these experiences we're having, technological experiences, which inherently are kind of unnatural or like unhuman, that we're going insane. And so things like the Flat Earth Avenue are like one version of insanity that's a reflection of like
Mm.
cell phones, etc., or the ability to be on a video chat with three of us in different places in the world.
Yeah,
Is
it's a
that what
kind of
you're saying?
insanity. I mean, my spiritual grandfather, Marshall McLuhan, said that the computer is LSD for the business community.
Mhm.
Now, everyone's got one now, right? Every little kid is, currently like playing some game I haven't heard of on their iPad. So it's no longer the business community, but the part about LSD still stands. And I'm sure McLuhan didn't trip, but he probably talked to plenty of people who were tripping, as being kind of, the spiritual guru of the University of Toronto, and in the 60s and 70s. And so he understood that there was a hallucinatory effect of all of this electrical technology. And so, and he didn't he worked for IBM, but he saw what computers could do, but he didn't see this. He was not in this complete immersion environment. And I'm not sure that he envisioned it. He envisioned a lot of things. Like he once said that a computer would someday track the destiny of every stick of gum. Now, if that does not sound like Walmart and Amazon, I don't know what does. But we're in this total immersion right now, where I'm in an office suite here that probably has 20 cameras in it, and 20 cameras, and there's probably 5 computers connected to the internet. Well, who imagined that, what's the effect of that on us? And so when people start pronouncing the earth flat and they're absolutely convinced that it's flat, I'm looking for, well, what does that have common ground with? What else
Right.
is standing on that ground, groundless ground, that has in common? And the entire world is off its spinning off its axis right now. And one of the reasons why I think that legitimate, meaning peace-loving, truth-loving astrologers can be such helpful people is that we do have the ability to embrace the chaos and to take in a lot of variables and to help people ground. We're the kind of hog farm tent at Woodstock, where all the people having a bad digital trip can come and chill out, assuming that the astrologer is also not on a bad trip.
Totally digital also. I mean, when I formed the school that I have, and it's one of the things that Gemini Brett and I are just such brothers on, is the desire to have astrologers not just be digital or just in their heads, but to actually get out under the sky on the land and have a direct human experience with our environment and with the
Hmm.
sky. I had this a transmission that happened to me in 1981 on a vision quest. I'm not even going to continue. Don't be an astrologer unless we work with the sky and work with the land and work with the seasons and have
Hmm.
an actual human experience with our environment. And that's really been our commitment, actually. And to be able, that's why I think Gemini's mission is bringing astronomy to astrologers. Well, in our school, we don't train anyone to be an astrologer unless they know the sky, unless they know the seasons and the connection of a human being to what we see and what we experience, not just what we know in a book or we know from a chart, but to be able to put the chart on the sky, actually. So that's really our commitment to try to make this not digital. I've never even owned a cell phone. We're still able to have digital, I'm sorry, analog phones over here, which is what we use, what my wife and I use.
Ah, okay. So you're on an analog connection. That helps explain.
No, no, no. I have a corded internet in my office, so I obviously have to use that. But I'm talking about not using a smartphone.
Yeah, but you got a phone number with a copper pair. It's called copper pair,
It's
like an
on. I have.
ordinary phone.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Oh
miss
yeah.
those terribly. These,
And we have a landline too.
yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. Landline is a copper pair,
Mhm.
real hardwired phone.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nostalgic for the for the old hardwired phone, huh? So flat Earth, I think, is a product of something that a lot of other things are a product of. And what
Yeah,
I'm
what are
curious
some of
if I
those? Sorry to interrupt you, Eric.
good.
And I'll ask you please to finish that. I'm very rude here, but I'm very interested in also knowing what are some of those other things.
Yeah,
So
that's what
if you
I'm getting at. I think
okay,
we need to
cool.
study this. I think, I mean, in a way, everything, the all the complete insanity that we're living through is a product of it. The whole question of is it true or is it not? I mean, earlier this week, a ship hit a bridge pier in Baltimore, and like everything else, it looked good. And it you know, I said from the get-go it looks good, but it always looks good the first couple of days. And now I'm talking to engineers who are saying that this can't be this way. It can't be this way. And so now we've got to look at, did this happen, or there was some kind of a planned thing? How did that ship lose power? How did that bridge just fall down like it was made out of matchsticks? And so we're in that age when you can't trust anything that you see. You've got to probe into every last damn thing. I mean, I think 9/11 was profoundly disorienting to watch these buildings just evaporate into the sky and falling at free fall speed. And they just told us over and over again what was happening. But the thing's almost a quarter of a mile high, standing up just fine through hurricanes and windstorms, and then all of a sudden it falls down like an ice cream cone melting. You know, steel going straight up into the sky for 110 floors. So but that too is a digital phenomenon, because I think the full digital age begins on 9/11. I think obviously computers were being used from World War II forward. They were analog. The transistor is invented at some point and they become digital computers. But I think we're in full digital conditions on 9/11 when this plainly impossible thing happened. And almost everyone thinks that that's exactly how it happened. So that's a property of it. And why not just say, well, NASA lies, the Earth is flat, right? That complete lack of you got to have some causation. You got to have some. There's got to be a little.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ripple effect in so many ways. You know, there's an interesting, astrologically, there was an eclipse on the solstice that year, and then again in
Mm,
2020, right? So I was looking forward to 2020 for years, kind of for different reasons than a lot of astrologers were, because I was really fascinated by these eclipses on the Milky Way at a time of galactic alignment, which is a huge thing, that I learned from Daniel. And it's so interesting to see how much of the COVID happening, like a lot of those laws of, martial law, medical martial law, were actually put into place in 2001. Um, and I think that that kind of repercussion, now, like the flat earth thing for me, it was like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I remember because I was in my Uranus opposition and our friend Gary Caton saw me like engaging with folks on Facebook a bunch about it. And he was like, dude, listen, this is what happens at Uranus opposition. It used to be, I'm going to do all these things in my days. And now it's, oh, I don't have enough days to do all the things. So choose what you're doing, right? It's like that was his advice to me, basically
mhm.
telling me that I should stop wasting time on this stuff. So it just helps me kind of date it when I was like 42-ish or whatever at Uranus opposition.
Wasting time on
On
studying.
like entertaining the flat earth and like spending time like debating people online about it and whatnot, right?
Right.
So I mean, just meaning that it came around like well before the COVID craze, for example. And I really appreciate hearing you say like it was a seed to keep people from questioning the moon landing. And I have this other question. I have all these questions for you, because you've said so many profound things as far as I'm concerned along the way. It's like, well, what happens if people do, like, what happens if Apollo, at least, the first moon landing was faked, and people realize that? Like, what are the results, right? And it feels
Right.
like there is generally this like untangling. Yeah, and that's what I'm also hearing from you. I mean, whether like I'm almost like I'm very interested in what you had to say about like just the impossibility of the three of us speaking from different places on the globe, or the disc, if you prefer, at the same time. Um, and how much of kind of like a shock to the human being that is, and there can be all sorts of fallout. Because I haven't really like considered that enough, and I'm really appreciative of it. I mean, I'm kind of looking to AI through a similar lens, but I hadn't. It's like I'm not considering the water that me as a fish is swimming through enough, right? So I really appreciate
Hmm.
that. But
Hmm.
9/11, I did see, and I knew it was off, but it took me years to like challenge it, and I, and then didn't have the courage to challenge it enough just personally to finally crack through. And like it was a really painful process for me, like, and on the other side, the things I became, like when I was speaking earlier about like, when you find out that these things you believe to be true are not, it's pretty easy to sign up for whoever walks by saying this is the real truth, right? So I've
Or this bullshit,
appreciated
that's bullshit, that's bullshit, that's bullshit.
everything's bullshit except for this. Come on and
Right.
wear some white Nikes, right? But yeah, so like I think that kind of 9/11 happening was such a part of this collective like dismantling.
Hmm.
And there's something else, and I don't know if it's even on track here, but Daniel and I were speaking about this recently with like Terence McKenna's wave theory. I forgot what he called it, right? Which like we all come to this singularity, like everything happens at once.
Right.
And it's intriguing to see like flat Earth from this old cosmology coming back like at this real time. Like
Well,
maybe
that's
that's a symptom.
retrieval. That's the every new technological environment retrieves something old. This is a classic McLuhan foundational concept. New media environments, see if I can remember all four. They enhance, they retrieve, they reverse, and they obsolesce, I think, are the four things that each one does. It's called the tetrad. And so that retrieval, digital retrieves medieval, is one of my aphorisms for the digital. And if you'll notice, the best jobs today that are not technology jobs are, basically butcher, baker, candlestick maker. The jobs that existed 500 years ago are good jobs today. Fromageur, winemaker, bourbon crafter. Uh, those are good jobs today, right? Sauerkraut maker. These are better than ever, right? Who would think? When I was a
Making
kid,
making
sauerkraut was some
vinyl,
what?
making vinyl recordings.
Well, sure. I mean, that's sure, and cassettes now are so. There's always a revival. There's always a retrieval, and so we could look carefully at what digital is retrieving and see that. But I think that when you change the frame, not to a debate about the shape of the planet, but what the environment is doing, and it really is about the fish and water, because this is really about studying the environment that we're in, which is difficult to do without real awareness and studying the disturbances in the environment. That's one of the best ways to see the environment, is to study the blips in the in the environment. But from the 9/11 chart, didn't that chart kind of give you the willies a little bit?
Yeah, but I mean, I would think it would be even much more extreme and just wild, like from that moment itself.
But it's
Um,
not an extreme chart. The chart is
right.
very slick. The moon is void, of course. You've got Mercury and Saturn in an absolutely impeccable mutual reception down to the degree, meaning that Mercury, the actor, switches places with Saturn in Libra. I know Saturn's in Gemini and Libra's rising, I think, is how it worked. Uh, right. So the thing is, maybe you didn't have the tools to challenge 9/11, and was acquiring the tools and also not being caught in belief. So one of the things that annoys me about the flat Earth is that their tools are all dull. That anybody arguing for the flat Earth should be able to absolutely destroy the sunrise equation. You can't just bring a new set of proofs to the question. You've got to destroy the existing proofs. Far as I'm concerned, that's what I have to do as a journalist. I have to look right at what someone says to me and be able to explain why that is not so. So that's a set of perceptual and expressive tools that have to be crafted over a long period of time. And the thing that gets in the way of all of it is belief. This is the real water that we need to learn how to jump out of, is belief, because that's the narcotic.
Yeah, and that just to, that retrograding back, like that's the thing that I most did appreciate about the challenge of the flat earthers. It really
Hmm.
helped me look at what do I believe and how much of that was gleaned through experience versus, regurgitating what I was taught to be true. And I'm happy to say, like, I found a ton of it is through my wisdom and through my experience, and also through, learning the math,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And learning then to trust it, and yeah, and learning things just like you said before, Eric. Like, okay, so it's getting dark because the sun's moving away from me. Then why isn't it getting smaller? Because anytime anything goes away from me, it gets smaller. So
Hmm.
riddle me that,
Oh
like,
no, there's a rheostat behind it. They're
Yeah,
just
yeah, exactly.
a shrinkostat.
Yeah.
Well, Dave McKeegan. There's a photographer named Dave McKeegan whose videos are fantastic at explaining this, and he never gets riled up. He's got this gorgeous dog with his chin in his lap through the whole thing, so everything's super calm, super chill, and him one by one he just breaks this down, including answering their challenges. You know, show me that you can photograph the International Space Station flying in front of the moon. So it took him months to get this photo, months, because it doesn't always fly in front of the full moon. Can you imagine how many variables are going on to be within driving distance for him to be able to get a shot of the ISS passing in front of the moon based on the ISS schedule? And he got the shot. It's not the world's best photo. He was shooting video and still and all that, and it only passed in front of the moon for about half a second, but he got the shot. And he takes apart all of their photographic claims, and one of his best videos is he took the raw data from the ISS camera that's pointed at the Earth, because NASA publishes the raw files, not just the JPEGs. They publish the raw files. So you have a lot of data in those files, and he analyzed the data in those files, including analyzing what was visible in the reflections on the shiny surfaces on the outside of the ISS, and showing how the reflections on those many surfaces also matched what was you could see by looking down at the planet. And so when you start to see proof like that, poor Amanda Vollmer saying the International Space Station is a hunk of junk. I mean, she's a lovely woman, but you know, come on, come on. Ham operators talk to the people in the ISS. Ham operators, the whole thing is debunked by ham operators who bounce off the moon and who use satellites. There are satellites that exist for ham operators. So the problem that they have, the people who fall for the joke have, right, who argue with them, is that this is a settled issue, and the question is why are they saying this? That the question is not the shape of the planet, the question is the shape of their mind. And of course, if you engage honestly, you learn about the shape of your mind. So I've loved it for that reason too, and the whole issue is quieted down around me. All the show me the curve, bro people have gone away, because I was getting a lot of where's the curve, bro? Space is a lie, bro.
Yeah.
Isaac Newton was an idiot. That's one of my
Yeah.
favorite quotes of all. Isaac, that's an idiot. Well, we'll take it.
Well, so far I've heard a couple reasons like why it's happened, and one would be more kind of seeded psyop to kind of distract people from moon landing discoveries. Another is more of like a symptom of our collective insanity due to the emerging kind of digital age and computer thing that we really weren't ready for. It's all happening so fast.
Mm.
What are some other theories that you've considered or feel to be true?
Well, I really think that the question of why it's catching on now, right? Because the flat Earth has always been around, right? There's always been people who posited that the Earth is flat and try to draw maps of it, and Flat Earth Society. I think, does it come out of the 50s? I think that's out of the 50s.
Yeah, I think so.
So why was the Flat Earth Society a joke, right? When I heard about it, I was in high school, and I just thought, well, there's all kinds of wacky people, but now suddenly it's taken seriously. So that's more of the question. It's always been there, right? So you'd have to look at the environment and the fact that it may have been uh, provoked in the mid 20 teens to run interference on the moon landing questioners. Excuse me, I'm hiccuping. That too requires an environmental factor to get it to work, right? It wouldn't work without the internet. Even if you don't think the internet is the formal cause of all of this, you couldn't do it without a comment area, right? You put out a magazine, you can put the magazine on a fence post and shoot it, but that doesn't really matter. You can fire off a letter to the editor, but that doesn't matter. But if you raid the comments on a website, that matters.
But it's like so intriguing, and like need the internet to get the information around fast enough because it's so whack, right? But like it was at the top of the algorithm. And I mean, some of that's possibly because I research strange shit, right? And so like at that time when YouTube or whatever seemed a little bit more free, more interesting information was being recommended to
Mm-hmm,
me,
mm-hmm.
right? But I mean, it was like I couldn't turn on the internet
Without
without having flat Earth videos pushed on to me. And that well, I wasn't the only one having that experience. Do you know what I mean? And so it did even
uh-huh.
feel in that regard like it was this thing that was being really pushed
It could,
forward.
I mean, it is absolutely possible that this is agenda, like not only agenda of like, let's bring it up, but rather agenda of actually the search engines pushing it up because somebody told them to.
May I bring up a related issue here? And
Hell
it's the
yeah.
and it's the reason why I got interested in being part of this and making this happen. It's the conversations we had when you let me know that some of the main figures in the terrain theory and in the no virus group were into this. And it's really sad because to me, it discredits them.
Hmm.
The fact that they can easily be debunked by
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, look, why should we believe those people because they're into this thing?
Yeah.
And I think it requires far more discrimination in the same way that individuals that push to try to bring out really legitimate things about what we're discovering in anthropology and archaeology, who must go to the alien card.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't necessary. It just distracts people from actually getting into what is actually being revealed. So to me, the fact that some of these people that are doing such great, like Amanda, for example, and some of the others that you've revealed to me, that were heavily into the flat Earth thing, who are some of the best exponents for the no virus, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, and it really discredits them. And I think that they're not sufficiently aware that by not going more deeply into this or being distracted by this, that it really changes their credibility.
Well, they think they're triumphing. The theory behind the flat Earth is that if they topple the spherical Earth, the fourth industrial revolution will collapse. They've cast the spherical Earth, the ball theory, as being the central lie supporting the entire agenda.
Which is so to me, it's just it's very unfortunate to hear that's where they're going with it.
I wish I had some of the memos I wrote to this group in the summer of 2022. where I said, look, if I was an editor of the New York Times wanting to get a promotion, I would do a front page feature on all of you people and completely destroy the terrain theory movement by showing how many of you are flat earthers.
Yeah, yeah.
But look, it goes further. So there's more here. For example, one of those people, one of the smartest among them, is trying to convince me that carbon doesn't exist because you can't prove that an atom exists. And I said, well, but you can create consistent carbon-based compounds. Your car drives, airplanes are made of stuff that works up there in the atmosphere, and you can make a jet engine, and it's titanium. But he was arguing vehemently that that carbon doesn't exist, just like viruses don't exist, because you can't actually see an atom. You can't isolate an atom. And I have some of those emails where I said, look, you can't. It's not that simple. The fact that you can use chemistry to dependably synthesize molecules tells you there's something to that theory where you can't predict anything with the virus model. It's complete shit. So that's one. There was not an atomic bomb. That's one. We talked about that, I think, with you can make the bomb, but it can't be portable. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were big TNT bombs. Another one is that all the Beatles and the Rolling Stones songs were written by the Tavistock Institute, right. And they never wrote a single song. The Beatles, Lennon and McCartney, nah, they couldn't. Nothing. No. And Paul is dead. That came back. That it's not Paul, it's Saul or Fall or some. Or that guy that I took my dad to 6 years ago, played Madison Square Garden, left-handed bass, left-hand guitar, and even left-handed piano, and knew every song, was not actually Paul McCartney. And I'm thinking, have you ever picked up a bass guitar? Like, have you ever seen a bass guitar that wasn't like on a video? They taught someone to play the bass guitar left-handed, and then
he's way better than Paul was.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's actually sure. That's the thing that got me started. And not awakening, I like to call it my weirding process. Because my dad, like, that's one of the good things my dad gave me was the Beatles, and so I didn't come across this idea of Paul is dead until I was like, I don't know, 35 or something.
Oh, see, it was big. What year were you born?
Well, of course, I was born in 75, and it just never crossed my radar. And I fucking freaked out, you know what I mean? And I like went way down that rabbit hole, and that just opened up all the rabbit holes for me.
I must say, though, that if you've ever read the updated version of the memoirs of Billy Shears, it's very compelling, actually.
Yeah.
Very, very compelling.
The first Paul lived on the round earth, and so there wasn't room for him anymore.
Well, right. So here we're talking. Where part of the digital phenomenon is reality splitting into layers and fragments that we think of as being bubbles, but actually they are almost discrete spheres of consciousness, like what you dreamed and what I dreamed, except for the part about where we have the same dream. If I have some dream and Giamario appears in my dream and I write to him in the morning and says, that's funny, Eric, I had the exact same dream about you. We were at Chichen Itza. So right. The problem with the Beatles, well, look, there's a problem with all of them is it's the music. For example, with the Beatles, it always comes down to the final physical proof. But there's a long list of these things that are said to not be true. So we've got the Beatles, the atomic bomb, atoms, they're not true. Viruses is on that list. The moon landing is on that list. We could go on and on for a while. But these things are proliferating in the digital environment, and they're, I think, inseparable from it.
Yeah, I agree.
So there we are. I mean, to me, I'm 10 years older than you, a little bit. I'm born in 64, 11 years. So soon after I discovered the Beatles, I learned about the Paul is dead thing. Playing Strawberry Fields Forever backwards, I buried Paul here and now, that kind of thing, and the analyzing the cover of Abbey Road and all of this stuff. And to me, as a 13-year-old, I thought this is very clever marketing.
Yeah. A
Wow, they're
smart
keeping everyone
12-year-old.
involved. They're involving us. What did you add there? Sorry, Jim.
I said you're a smart 12-year-old. Because yeah, I mean, that's my general feeling is that they created this whole thing to sell records, and they're just absolutely genius, and to like, mess with people, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fun from their viewpoint. I think it's a little bit Kanahara, it's a little bit dark to do that. But Macca is still out there having a good time. I guess so is Bob Dylan. So when you look at this long list of things that are said to not be true and who falls for them, I mean, I got into a really interesting discussion about the Beatles with Mike Yaden, who I know from my he's the former VP of Pfizer. And we've successfully come to a meeting of the minds on the virus question, and then he's like, yeah, well, and I jokingly mentioned the Beatles. He said, well, except that I don't think the Beatles were real. But it gets to the question, well, who the hell wrote those songs? Songs exist. I know what the Brill Building was, right? You've heard of the Brill Building, right? They were buildings with a lot of rooms with pianos and a singer and a composer and a lyricist, and they had a music writing factory. So, the great minds like Carole King and Neil Diamond worked in the Brill Building. Well, you're telling me that Tavistock Institute had kind of a Brill Building that came up with Abbey Road? What? So it's all in the physical proof. But if you kind of put all these issues on, you spread them out onto the landscape, and you'll see, these are all part of the same thing. So how do you not get lost in that? I mean, I think you have to stay. What's that?
If you're talking about your experience, I was 14 when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan. All right. And so
You saw
basically,
this? Did you see this?
oh, hell yes. And in fact, I even heard the Beatles before they were well known in the United States because their records hit Bangkok, Thailand, when I was living there in 1963. And they were all over the radio even before their records were like #1 in the US. And so I went through all those years of their transformation and changes. And so my own experience of my own transformation and changes were right along as they were, So I have a view of them based upon my direct experience, not looking back on it. And basically what they were, I think John Lennon said it once. He said, well, did you ever think you were all that innovative? And he says, well, not really, but we were on a ship and we got to be in the crow's nest. So as that ship was going into new territory, they got to call it out. And they were really courageous with that. I mean, it was a really it was real. It was real. That was not some sort of manipulated event.
Yeah, and none of these things factor in the astrology of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. But let's not lose sight of the acceleration that everyone went through.
And yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
I gotta share this thing that I saw this morning because it's like weird. Which was actually just, I think it was like on Facebook, and I saw this image of the power of LSD, and it showed, the Beatles in black and white in suits, and then their their Sergeant Pepper cells, right? Like just so enemy on the other side. So just that I'm hearing about the Beatles and that LSD was in the conversation earlier. Before that, in this crazy digital age, there was an article that flashed on my phone this morning, and I went to check it out, and it was talking about the popularity of astrology today. That's like interesting. I was like waiting for a coffee, so let me start reading that. I didn't know what it was trying to address the problem of the popularity of astrology. And so I didn't finish it. I read a few paragraphs, but it was kind of one of the things they had mentioned was a religiousness, right? And then a lack of a problem with like trusting authority. But I'm interested in, when a lot of the flat earthers that I was actually around in Seattle when I lived there, that's like when it was happening in my environment, they had this thing that like you couldn't be spiritual on a bald earth. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
been like the weirdest part of it to me, which was like, so NASA lied to you, like you were shown a globe in school so that you wouldn't know your connection to
God.
God or spirit or universe or whatever
Yeah.
you want. It's like, well, why can't I have that on a bald Earth, man? Like, how is it that a flat Earth allows for religiosity or
Let me see if
spirituality?
I can.
So
Let's see
now
if I
you're going for that
can.
thing that came across your screen weeks ago or something, huh?
Well, I'm looking for. I can't say who. PDF. Let's see if I can find it.
Daniel, have you
Uh,
come across that side of the flat Earth folk that
I
for
have
some
not.
reason,
No, no,
yeah.
that's quite. I'm glad that I haven't really
okay,
engaged
let me. I
much
can't
in
say
it.
who wrote this. But I've read it on air before, and the author was very annoyed and broke up with me. But
Oh,
um, several of us doctors in the no virus camp. Okay, let me read the whole thing. I was just sent your post. It's from a year and a half ago. Sent your post on flat Earth and wanted to touch base on that. Firstly, I want you to know that if you apply the same logic and scientific analysis as to the virus issue, you'll find the same result. That's not true. First of all, the mainstream story has no evidence. The story of the sphere Earth has no evidence. That's not true. That's not true. It does not have no evidence. Several of us doctors realize the Earth is not a sphere and it's not spinning or flying through space. The astrology has been worked out for other models besides a sphere, but that's a straw man argument. The only thing I can tell you about the only thing I can tell you about the shape of the Earth is the shape of the Earth. The most compelling evidence that refutes it is line of sight experiments. That's bullshit. They're repeatable. That's bullshit. You can do it yourself. That's bullshit. Flight training books for NASA FAA use stationary plane model. That's bullshit because they're using it just to simplify the mathematics as a teaching example. We found these documents and they are purely hypothetical examples. Then he gets into the Michelson-Morley experiment about the ether that tells us the Earth is not moving. Come on. Einstein, blah, 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 blah. The theory of general relativity was generated to conceal the fact
Yeah.
that the Earth is not moving. Okay. Hope this helps you understand why many of us doubt the globe model, which makes us men and women insignificant, just ants on a ball, spinning themselves into dizziness and hurling through space in several frames of reference of motion at incredible speeds for eternity without a purpose.
Unbelievable.
And I replied and said, yes, insects crawling on the planet's face, lost in time and lost in space and lost in meaning. That's from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So this is somebody who is probably read 5,000 scientific studies, and really gets the virus problem. But this brings up the spiritual issue. He believes that the globe model makes us insignificant ants on a ball spinning themselves into dizziness. Look, personally, I like where I am. I like being on a planet orbiting a sun, orbiting a galaxy, part of Laniakea, hurtling through space in the direction of 1407 Sagittarius.
and many reference planes.
Many reference planes, sure. There's lots
Yeah,
of
and
reference
I can
planes
dig
there.
it.
You're forgetting the Great Attractor? How could you forget the Great Attractor?
Yeah, I
So,
mean, so I maybe though like that side of it, especially as I hear you read that, like astronomers today, mainstream astronomers, popular astronomers, do often speak about how insignificant we are, that we're just some tiny little planet on around a star that's even like kind of less than average, and there's so many of these, and it really just kind of has that like anti-spiritual kind
mhm.
of materialist thing. And so maybe the flat earth is also like, at least this side of the flat earth is a reaction to that or a response to that. So I'm trying to stay connected to spirit or whatever you would call it, you know.
Sure. And look, there's a spiritual crisis, and we need to acknowledge that there's a spiritual crisis. And what's that crisis about? Well, I would say that we're partly in a crisis generally, and then we've got this digital problem, which is basically completely supplanted God for most people. That the internet is now the omniscient thing with the all-knowing, all-controlling entity, the robot. We're worshiping the robot now, as we live. Uh, right.
I'm wondering if there was a flat earth surge after the Kennedy assassination. Because if indeed like part of my weirding whatever is at the hands of 9/11, um, and so many people sniffed that the JFK thing was not what we were sold, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder like what kind of movements similar to this, like what synonyms erupted at that
The
time.
60s.
Yeah, I mean, just the
It's
just the
called
entirety
the
of the
conspiracy
60s,
theory
right?
known as the 60s. I
And
got
so,
this
and right,
friend,
and so
Daniel,
I
he was
wasn't
there.
there. And so, like, you know,
Yeah.
my assumptions about this were that most of what cats were saying was bullshit in the 60s was accurate, right? That they were saying you can't trust the patriarchy and the government and those kinds of things. Daniel, here's a fun question for you because you were thriving at that time, yeah? Like, what was the most false thing that you heard taught as some kind of paradigm in the 60s? Were there any like synonyms for like a flat earth society that happened in your experience in the 60s
Vietnam
or
War,
80s that
maybe?
people were trying to sell that weren't real?
Well, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, there's so many. I mean, I pretty much I could make a large list. To say there's one dominant one was just really having any belief or trust that our parents knew anything. You know, and so we basically were seeing through their worldview. I mean, I now look back on it and see it as a feature of what that generation was and what my generation was, which was a reaction against that. Uh, I think that there's a movie that really portrays it incredibly well. It's that movie called Pleasantville, where you go back into a black and white, and then you inject yourself, and then it starts coloring. You know, so it's like when we began to perceive that the very static consensus, which was rather black and white, was crap, and the discovery that our parents didn't hardly know anything really. And so of course our had Pluto and Leo generation, we had our own arrogance, you know, of course, that we know better than anyone, but nevertheless, it was exposing the previous mindset that was happening at that time period. As far as the Kennedy assassination, I mean, I it's a huge shock. I mean, I remember, I mean, I was living in Thailand at that time period when it happened. And my dad was military. You know, he was actually associated with the other assassination that was happening, which was DM, who was killed, you know, some weeks before. You know, so we were engaged in all of that, as well as the CIA overthrow of the previous prime minister of Thailand that was happening when we were over there. You know, so my dad was figuring all of this stuff out, you know, and he managed to get out of the Vietnam War just in time before they made him run the war out of Saigon. You know, so all this stuff was being blasted through at that particular time period. My own personal heartbreak was actually with regards to the space program. I was helped tremendously. Oh my God, I was tracking every satellite that went up. I had like charts. I was so into it, so incredibly into it, until I saw some of the early quote unquote conspiracy. It was stuff that came out in stuff like Popular Mechanics, believe it or not, where there's articles talking about it was a cover for military. My heart was broken. And so that's why I didn't really take that whole space program thing with seriously, you know, because I saw it for what it was,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even back at that time period. So it just didn't really mean that much. It was the assassinations of 1968 that really totally busted the bubble. And that was like where I saw a timeline split that happened at that point, that a particular track that many of us was on was diverted at that particular time period. It
Mm-hmm.
had to with the different drugs that came in. It had to do with a lot of the split that was happening in the alternative and the awake community at that point. You know, to be channeled either into Eastern gurus or to be channeled into the underground. I mean, that was sort of like the two directions that those of us that were awake saw at that point. You know, so it was everything. I would say I can't just choose one thing. Everything was broken open as far as recognizing that what we were being shown, taught by the politicians, by our teachers. You know, I was really fortunate in the late 60s to be in a university that kicked out the ROTC, kicked out the fraternities and sororities, kicked out the military. You know, I mean, corporations. Corporations were not allowed onto our campus. You know, I mean, it was a moment of whoa, we could see possibilities, and then the timeline split.
Well, here we are at a singularity point. If we could end with this, I mean, I think that this eclipse is one of the most interesting eclipse charts I've ever seen, with the exact conjunction to Chiron,
Yep.
and sweeping through this part of the United States where a lot of people are going to see this one. You know, I think we're at another convergence point.
I agree.
And what do we do? You know, what?
I'm suggesting another timeline split in April.
Yep. So what do we do with this? What, you know, what do we do with this opportunity?
Well, I can only give you what I'm suggesting
I would love to hear it.
members of our school and members of I'm very fortunate so many of the people I work with, as well as members of our school, are pretty awake. I've already been experiencing the bifurcation that's taken place, and it's as if I'm living already in a parallel society. Individuals that do see through what's going on. And so I just like hanging out with them, you know. And if somebody asks me what I'm seeing, I will share with them. But I'm no longer feeling like I need to try to convince anyone, you know. I mean, at this point, I mean, I even look at the injection issue, you know, that I can understand and be very compassionate toward anybody in 2021, let's say, that went for it for a variety of reasons. But if a person starts continuing to take them and, you know, and doesn't see through it at this point, I'm not even going to try to convince them of anything. I mean, it's the bifurcation has already happened so extremely that, you know, we need to hang out with people who want to actually be willing to be human, you know, to be fully human, and to not digital, and to be willing to see what it is with heart and soul and emotion and feeling, and you know, that's what I'm interested in doing at this time, being around those folks and to connect with them, you know, because people can feel very isolated. And if they don't feel connected to others who are seeing not exactly everything, but can actually see through the spell that has been cast, that's what I want to do more than anything. And that's really what I do virtually every day, is to connect with those people, to keep them awake. Yep, you're on the right track. You're seeing it right. You know, oh God, I thought I was the only one. You know, so to be able to connect with those people in a heartful way is all I can consider doing. I think that's what my life purpose is.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, you are not alone.
Right.
And you don't have to do this on your own, right? Like I love it when, like, I just gave a talk in Sacramento and a guy was there. So it was the first time he was around other astrologers. He's been after it for 4 or 5 years, you know, and it's all been online for him. And I think that idea of fellowship, right? And just like giving you more confidence to keep walking into whatever weird space you're called to walk without hesitation. I love that this eclipse is right at the midpoint of that kind of Pisces, Mars, Saturn,
Yeah.
and then the Taurus, Jupiter, Uranus on the other side. And like you could just see like parting the seas between these two very different cultures and like belief systems, as you were saying. And there's one side, like I kind of like leaning towards that Jupiter, Uranus, and just this kind of like opportunity to like electrify through expanded embodiment, you know.
It's
But
a
yeah,
massive.
that's been
Sorry, go ahead.
That's just been a piece for me of like, I think it's very important on this path to have your hermetic days and to be in your tower and in your own study But that doesn't mean that's forever. And it's hilarious to me how perhaps the most common thing I hear in sessions as a complaint is I'm the only one that's into this stuff. Yeah, I live, there's no mystics in Paris. It's like, and I'll spit tea on my computer, right? It's like, oh, really? But that seems to be part of this thing. And so, like, no, Aries doesn't have to be isolation. It doesn't have to stand alone. There is something about like the commitment to the path you're on and how that is purposefully empowered through fellowship. Yeah, that for me is the calling of this.
Mm-hmm.
I have two other quick things to say on that regarding the April time and the eclipse time. Yeah, even now, I'm noticing if you use the July 4th chart of the U.S., I mean, everybody talks about the Chiron return and all of that, but even like right now, the South Node is on the U.S. Saturn. So basically, all these events that are happening I think, related to that. It's bringing up, dredging up the past, and every time the United States has not really learned anything from their Chiron returns. So these events that are all happening like crazy. Meanwhile, just Uranus and Jupiter, they move the assemblage point. They're moving the assemblage point into an opening into other worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And how people react to the moving of that assemblage point is what it's really all about. Either you cannot handle it or you're at the front of the wave. You're willing to move with the movement of the assemblage point, or you resist it.
There was another time we were speaking about recently where there was a strong alignment to the Saturn and the July 4th, 1776 chart, which was 9/11,
Yeah.
when Mercury was exactly conjunct that degree.
Mhm.
So, yeah, feeling the node there. I mean, I was just in DC, Eric, another time. It'd be fun to talk about some of the symbolism and star alignments I've unpacked there. It's crazy. And that whole star map's kind of getting activated now. But yeah, it's interesting, Daniel, just you saying that and me remembering that alignment of Mercury to US Saturn at that time. It's like the South Node there. It seems like we got to do a little memory laning. So anyway, hopefully this talk has helped other folks out there to not only feel the fellowship, but also like remember a few important points in time that if we can kind of clean up and understand what they were, it's going to be easier to move full force into a future that doesn't have to be completely lost to the digital weirdness. So actually, Eric, if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you just a question that I'm sure you've answered many times on your show, but what is the solution to some of the dis-ease or illness that's happening from this, digital thing that maybe we're not built for?
I agree with Grandpa McLuhan that the tools become toxic when we stop being creative with them. When we fall asleep and we cut off, the tools take us over. And so the only solution is to remain awake and creative and loving in these environments, basically to do exactly what we're doing here.
Mhm.
And to keep staying awake, because part of the trance is that this environment is very intense, and you reach around the world and it's like cool the first time, and then like it can become scary, and you can retreat and pull in and cut off your sensitivity and not and shut down. And I think that the key is to not shut down. The key is to stay awake, as difficult as it may be, and to be much more creator than consumer in this environment. Yeah.
Well,
I
I'm
like
intrigued, like when, sorry, maybe that was for you, Daniel. It's hard with three around the world. Like when the first application that I noticed individuals using with the AI was to create art. On one level, it felt like, oh, people always said that, like, the robot would never be able to paint or write a poem or something like that. And it was like, oh, so they want to get trained by humans in that thing first. But what I'm hearing here, Eric, which I feel is actually inspirational, it's like, oh, no, this is just people utilizing this new tool in a creative way. and that's how you actually use it as a tool instead of be used by it.
Hmm.
And that's what it is to stay
It's
awake.
still going to shape us,
Hmm.
but we still have the option to be creative with it, and that's a state of mind. That's a state of mind. So there may be two digital states of mind. There's the getting drowned out state of mind and hating everything and everyone. And then there's the keep your curiosity going, keep dropping your probes, stay interested in life, and use this environment to create. As it's busy creating us, we create it right back, I think. And anyway, I am definitely looking forward to getting in my car next weekend. Which weekend would it be? Not this coming weekend, but the next one, right?
Yep.
And driving up to the Rochester area to meet a new friend up there and see who's there. We were both just curious people, and he's got a little farm up there and a cabin, and I'm curious who I'm going to meet. We're planning. We've got an aim to go to a park on the north side of Cayuga Lake. So
Mm.
that's fantasy number one, as the merry pranksters used to say, and I'm curious who's going to be there.
What I'm planning with our school is there's a group of about 20 of us that are meeting just outside of Cincinnati, right? It's surrounded by all the mounds. And so we're going to be watching, we're going to be in the center line, near the center line on the Miamisburg Mound, actually, which is an ancient, mound structure, pre-colonial mound structure, right there in the Hopewell Mound area. And so we have a training with our school happening there, and one of the days dedicated to the eclipse. So I'll be out there.
You'll be in Ohio.
Yeah, I'll be leaving actually Monday on I'll fly into Atlanta and then get a car. And then our group is flying, a lot of them are flying into Cincinnati, and we're meeting just near the Serpent Mound.
Any chance you passing near New York or by through New York? Or are you going to veer west to Ohio?
Not on this trip because it's just a kind of a quick 2 week in and out because I'm going to be gone for 2 months in the summer in Europe, actually, all
All
over
right,
Europe.
just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, that would be wonderful to meet up with you. Absolutely.
All right, good. And I'm open to any teaching opportunities with your program. So if you think there's something I can teach, journalism, digital technology, minor planets,
Okay, sure.
happy to lend what I've invested into you.
I'm very, very happy to get you two together finally, so and I hope this has been rewarding. It has been for me, and very happy to be in the company of you two. I mean, this is a small part of our awakening happening here.
Fabulous, good. Well,
It's been
thank you for doing it, Jem. What are you going to add?
just a super fun for me. Like there's a lot of new contemplations and a lot of new dreams and a lot of like new angles to look at things. As I'm just very appreciative to have the opportunity to come on here and spend some time with you,
All
gentlemen.
right, and to all the people who are kind of conceptually here for us, right? We're speaking for an audience. The audience is not with us in this time frame, but we're going to then process this video, put it up on multiple video platforms, and then in another time frame, people are observing and listening to us right now, but it's a different right now than the one we're in.
Right.
Hello, it's been wonderful to hang out with you and to get this thing to get together and meet Gemini Brett, have another couple of hours here with my brother Daniel Giamario, visitor from the 60s, time traveler.
Yes, actually, and I remember it. I remember it. And
And
I
you
will
even took
not.
some drugs.
Yes, and I will not. I will not forget. I will not forget.
Yeah, yeah, good, good. Well, 60s, tales of the 60s are welcome around here. And because I think it's a very important era to have some understanding of and appreciation of. There
I'm
was
looking
definitely
forward.
a moment of something, a moment of awakening or something, and that Uranus Pluto conjunction opposite Chiron. There should be a semester long course to talk about that.
And when
Uh,
Jupiter was aligned, and then when Jupiter was aligned during that really peak time of it, when Jupiter with Uranus and Pluto.
Well, then
what?
Saturn came in, right, in that eclipse, but that
Yeah,
Saturn piece in Pisces, I mean, gosh, it We're
Yeah,
kind of have
well,
Saturn returning to that place now. That one felt like some of the shutdown of the whole thing, and so I would love to review that kind of month by month with folks who were there and didn't
I
know.
can directly remember my experience when I saw the dark force come over the Democratic Party at the
Hmm.
convention. I remember being down in my basement watching the convention when I actually saw it happen while the riot.
68.
Yeah, 68.
Yeah, you know
Yeah.
who should be in this conversation maybe if we're going to do the 60s is Jeff Strahl. He's kind of the company historian here at Planet Waves.
Hmm.
He's maybe I think a little older than you, Daniel, and was deeply involved and wide awake and studying STEM. He's a mathematics physics person, but heavily politically involved. And we've had some fabulous conversations on Planet Waves FM
I'd
with
love
him.
to. I would love to. I
Yeah,
have so many things to share, stories of direct experience from that time period in a way that I've described about it here, you know.
yeah,
I mean,
good.
so it was more community at that point. There's more people that really saw it for what it was, you
Hmm.
know. Hopefully it's catching on more now.
Well, they're there, but we're fragmented. That
Yeah, yeah.
sensation of no mystics in Paris, that's a real
Right.
feeling because everyone is in these parallel realities, which is why I think we need to make as many in-person meetings as we can possibly make and be
Yes.
paying attention when we're out in the world. I talk to a lot of strangers, so-called strangers, and I
Mhm.
meet every dog that crosses my path. And usually there's a person connected to the dog by a leash. So the dog's walking the person around on a leash, and I'll usually say hello.
And you can
Uh,
tell a lot about that person by their dog.
yeah, well, yeah, but I don't blame the dogs. I try to make a distinction between the dog and the person. But you can tell a lot about the person by how they respond. I can tell when I get on with the dog and really love the dog and have a moment with the dog, how are they responding to that? That's
Yeah.
really my barometer because I have a gift with dogs, and to me, dogs are just practice in throwing your heart wide open and
Hmm.
meeting them as equals, as peers.
Yeah.
And so that's my secret to dogs. To me, it's just heart opening exercise.
Well, so now I have to ask because I kept myself from asking this question a few times, but I think it's very relevant and alive in an echo to what you just said as well. Um, what is the right response? How do you stay open? Like, what is the right response in the face of the flat earther?
I try to model that in my conversations with I forget their names, which is just to stay open and stay friendly with them. I never want to argue with them, and I forget the guys. I wish I remember their names, but it's late, and it was like 2 3 months ago. But it was the friendliest flat Earth conversation in history, and we all liked each other. We all had a great time. We were all having fun, and I think that's the approach. And so you have to be an open-minded person to be available for these people's viewpoints, and to not judge them, but to keep finding out where they're coming from. I think that's really the thing is to in a friendly way keep getting them to explain themselves, and what they think, and really, oh, keep going. How did you, I asked him, like, when did you come to this realization? So to keep it loving and friendly, really, I think is the thing, and to not get partisan about it. Um,
Or like not try to fix them, just hope
yeah, no,
that
that's
they'll stumble
ridiculous.
into
It,
fixing themselves.
it's like
Well,
that.
what's to fix? They're in the digital sauce. They're swimming around in the digital sauce. I mean,
The compliment
On a
to it.
disc that's hurling. Oh, wait, sorry, it's not going
meaningless.
anywhere.
No, the disc. Here's the other thing. I've got to find this email I sent out about how I describe the wall of ice. I am stationary. I am I am the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. I'm surrounded by a wall of ice. I am unmoving. That's the flat Earth, right? So I think the approach of being simply being friendly is it really is the Jesus moment, right? That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah, it
Holy
ain't
Spirit
easy
lighting
being
up.
surrounded by a wall of ice.
Surrounded by a wall of
You gotta bring
ice.
some love to that place.
Yeah, they're surrounded by a wall of ice. I gave the Gestalt reading on this. What I said was the it in Gestalt therapy, it becomes I. You just cross off the T. So any it can become an I. Right. So someone says, it's like that. It's like that. It's like that. You just cross the I off and then you have much more cohesive statements. So I did the whole flat earth in it statements. And then I repeated it as I statements, and it makes much more sense as a series of I statements. It's a very isolated place to be, and insects call the human race. I mean, we do have a question of what we're doing here.
That's good Aries
I have
eclipse medicine right there too.
What was that? Then I want Daniel try to say something. What's that?
I was just wanting to interject something in the flow of this, is that I think the very best approach, if you're an astrologer or a counselor, is always be ready to say, it's my favorite thing to do in a session, well, how is it for you? How is it for you?
Yeah.
So rather than try to dictate to them, or, it's just,
what's your experience?
Right now? What's your experience? How is it for you?
Yep.
And that's in a counseling situation, but just in an ordinary conversation, it's just, you're in harmony with where that person is coming from in some way.
Well, if you're a teacher, you're never not a teacher. I think that's important. And the message of A Course in Miracles and many other things is always your example that teaches. The words only get so much, but the example is what teaches. And so I was intentionally modeling the sane conversation with the two Flat Earth brothers who had the hypnotizing sun spinning around on the thing, and we were little boxes, and it was just going around and around. And I thought, this is all about keeping it friendly. There's nothing else going on here. All right, it is 1:11 a.m. here in the Hudson Valley of New York State. I've got a radio show to do. Hopefully my voice holds up for all 3 hours.
See you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks yes, and thank you. And out there in Planet Waves TV land, love here from the home office. Jack of Hearts signing off. Gentlemen.
Happy eclipse, everyone.